Now, speaking of people who go outside in their pajamas to fight evil,
Oh man.
we watched The Phantom, or per this French movie poster we found, Le Fantôme du Bengale.
Yes, oui.
And if there are any French people in the audience, apologies for the pronunciation. I took
Yes.
German and Spanish.
Yes. Yeah. I took Spanish. Yeah. So yeah.
So I think we picked this one because was this on Netflix or was it on Max? I forget.
Max.
Yeah, I think it's because I dipped into Max for one of our previous week reviews and I decided to see what there was on there before I dipped out again.
Yeah.
And plus, I'd always been kind of curious about this one because yeah, I'd never seen it, and it's just kind of famous as a bomb. So I was a bit curious about does it hold up? Was it unjustly forgotten?
Yeah. Yeah. I actually saw this movie in the theater when I was a kid. Um, because I think it was one of the few movies that was out at the time that I could go see in the theater with that my mom could take me to.
And I wouldn't even necessarily call this one the most appropriate for kids as it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though it's rated PG, I mean, it's
Right there,
yeah.
there's some S bombs. There's some sexual undertones, though I guess the kid wouldn't catch or couldn't. Yeah, kid wouldn't catch on to that.
No, I didn't catch on to it when I was a kid. um, but yeah, this movie came out, I think, right around the same time as the first Mission Impossible.
1996.
Yeah. So, and I believe, of course, both of them are Paramount movies. So I don't think Paramount was too concerned about this movie bombing, considering they had Mission Impossible.
Yeah, this the whole making of this movie is kind of interesting, or I should say at least the why it was why it was likely greenlit
Mm.
because Batman came out in 1989 and blew up the world, and so other studios went, hmm, well, we
Yeah,
don't really have access or the budget to do a real superhero movie, but Batman was a 1930s pulpy character
yeah, yeah,
who's a superhero. What if we greenlit movies about similar superhero adjacent media from the time, like this in the Shadow?
yes, and yeah, and the Rocketeer with Disney. Yeah.
Right. Uh, right. That's as good as getting a Batman. We're gonna. Oh, and also Dick Tracy got made.
Oh yeah, yeah,
So I guess it's like any DC comic character was tied up at Warner Brothers, and Marvel. Well, their live action productions throughout the 70s and 80s were kind of bad, to put it bluntly.
yeah, yeah. They're yeah, like the Captain America movie and
Dolph Lundgren Punisher.
Dolph Lundgren Punisher. You had Roger Corman's Fantastic Four, which never actually got released.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because the special effects just weren't around to make a proper Marvel movie on a budget. Oh, and there was also a James Cameron Spider-Man movie that went nowhere.
yeah, yeah.
But okay, we've been talking around the movie. Let's talk about
Yes,
the movie.
yes, yeah. Yeah, so the Phantom is, of course, as DB mentioned, a 1930s pulp fiction comic book hero. He's he goes by another name called, they call him the Ghost Who Walks,
Hmm.
and the reason for that is because he dies, but then he'll come back wearing the same purple spandex suit,
Right.
and
When it's really just a mantle that gets passed from person to person, but
yeah.
because it's a secret, there's this 400-year myth about the Phantom just like being immortal.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's a generational thing. Yeah, it's passed from father to son. And yeah, cuz which it gets mentioned later on that the Phantom, getting married and having kids is actually very important. But which I think is like the only comic book character I can think of where that's the case.
Yeah. Well, it helps that this is a comic strip character, so.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. But yeah, so it picks up in 1938. They're in the Bengali jungle, and you got these treasure
Note,
hunters,
not Bengal, the region in India.
right?
Bengali,
Bengali.
it's a Walmart counterpart.
Yes. And one of the treasure hunters is played by James Remar, who who was the bad guy in 48 Hours, which was a movie we
Oh, okay.
reviewed.
I thought he seemed familiar.
Yeah, and he was also originally cast to play Corporal Hicks in Aliens, but he got fired from the movie because he got arrested for having illicit substances.
Ooh.
Yeah, so he got replaced by Kyle Reese from Terminator. Um, but that's another story for another time. But they're in the jungle, and because they're looking for this skull. It's a silver skull, and they've got this kid who's they basically kidnapped and are forcing him to be their guide, and then drive their big truck across a really rickety wooden bridge because they're jerks.
They established a few things about the villains very early on.
Yeah,
First off, this movie has kind of a campy, jokey feel to it in a lot of places.
yeah, it does. Yeah,
It's
and I
almost
think
almost
yeah,
Marvel-esque.
yeah, and I think that's kind of partially because in the '90s, they really didn't know how to make a comic book superhero movie really, and they weren't really sure if they should make it like just really dark or if they should make it campy. And I this movie kind of like bridged the two, although probably ventured more into campy. Because I
Right.
mean, it's about I mean, this is a movie with a guy wearing a purple spandex. I mean,
Yeah, we'll get into that in a minute. So, but they also do a good job of showing that the villains are pretty much scum because, oh well, someone has to drive our truck across the rickety bridge and make the local boy do it.
yeah, yeah. Um, so, so
And
yeah, so the yeah,
so they get the skull, and the Phantom shows up with on his riding his horse with his wolf. Was it devil?
devil, yeah,
The devil, the wolf at his side.
yeah, yeah, and uh, then of course James Remar's character is like, well, no, this he's just like, how is this? How's he here? I killed him already, Um,
Right. And also, they did a little bit of foreshadowing where one of them had a mark of a skull on the side of their head, which was
mhm,
left when you get punched by the Phantom's ring.
yes, and unfortunately for the Phantom, the bad guys get away with the skull, but he does manage to rescue the kid. And when he's in his cave, his kind of like bat cave kind of thing, um, he finds out that the skulls are that the skull that they took was only one of three, and all three of them together make this big super weapon. uh, and they and from what he could tell, they were the bad guys are part of the Sang Brotherhood, which are they're like a band of pirates. They're the mortal enemies of the Phantom.
Right. They were the ones who got the ancestral Phantom washed up on a shore originally.
Yes. And the other aspect of the movie is that the ghost of the Phantom's father, or I should say the Phantom is played by Billy Zane, um, who most people remember from Titanic. Um, and of course he talks to his real name's Kit Walker, and he talks to his father, who's played by the guy from The Prisoner,
Patrick McGoohan.
McGoohan. Thank you. Um, and yeah, he talks to his dad, who's a ghost, and uh, that's never really explained if he's actually talking to him or if it's just like he's talking to himself and like his.
I think that the ghost knew things that he didn't at some point, so
Okay.
I could be mistaken.
Oh no, that's right. He did. Yeah. But yeah. The Phantom's got to find these skulls, and then we cut to New York City, where we meet
Xander Drax, played
Xander.
by Treat Williams.
Yes. Yeah.
My, my favorite character in the whole movie because he's like a sinister version of who's that insane 30s millionaire made the Spruce Goose?
Oh, Howard
Howard
Hughes.
Hughes. Howard Hughes. Yeah, he's like an evil Howard Hughes with his energy. Like the guy is just so completely evil, and I loved it. I loved every moment he was getting to be evil on the screen. Like
Yeah, yeah, and he took joy in being evil too. Yeah.
right, like so he'd been doing research on the skulls, and that information got to the Phantom.
Mhm.
Drax realizes that got to the Phantom, so he calls in the head librarian to say, "Hey, my research that's been kept secret, right? Oh, of course it has.
Mhm.
Great." Now he'd been playing around with a gimmicked microscope that if you twisted the knobs, like two spikes would shoot up into the
Y-
eyes.
Yeah.
But yeah, he makes the guy go over and I say, "Could you help me look at something? I'm trying." Like, hands you to focus,
Mhm.
and right before the knives pop up, there's a sheet of paper under there that just says "liar." When the head librarian was saying that he had kept his secrets,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
like that is an amount of dedication to the craft of evil that you just have to
Yes.
admire.
Yeah. 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 Um, yeah. And so, but the editor of the big newspaper in New York is on to Xander Drax, because he knows all about what he's doing. And of course, he can't leave. I can't remember why they wouldn't let him leave. He couldn't leave New York for whatever reason. So instead, his niece Diana Palmer, who's played by Christy Swanson, she goes in his stead because she's a strong, independent woman. You know who?
uh, of a 1930s variety.
Yes, yeah.
Eh, And they did some interesting things with her that were subtle. I don't know if they quite rise to the level of subtle, but I enjoyed it. Like she's just very uncomfortable with her upper class lifestyle. Like
Hmm.
she shows up at a party, she isn't wearing a dress, she's just wearing like adventuring clothes. There's this rich guy who's been after her. She says, "Oh, I'm starving." They go back to the kitchen and she makes herself a rough bologna sandwich
Yeah,
rather than eating the hors d'oeuvres at this party.
yeah, yeah.
So they do a good job with establishing her character pretty quick. Um, and we get introduced to the other villain when they basically pull a tailspin and sky pirates show up to force the airliner she's on to land.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we get meet a Catherine Zeta-Jones's character Sala,
Hmm.
who I'm sure was some little boy's awakening
Oh yes.
because she's a classic femme fatale, seems to almost have a thing for Diana, definitely has a thing for the Phantom.
Hmm.
And we should
Yeah.
mention that Phantom and Diana had a thing from when the Phantom was apparently in the U.S. going to college in between his adventuring, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh no, maybe he had been sent there and he had to quit. He suddenly had to quit college, possibly because maybe that's when his dad died and he had to come back and be the Phantom.
I think that's what it was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. It's been a week since we watched it, so I'd kind of forgotten.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. So yeah, because he shows up in New York, meeting with her uncle, and Yeah, she gets on. She's like, "Well, you left. You didn't say goodbye or anything." He's like, "Well, I had to take over the family business." Yeah,
Yeah, yep. Okay, thank you. That makes sense.
yeah,
Um, so the rest of the movie is kind of it's a treasure hunt. Oh, we have to keep the villain from getting the skull, and
yeah,
I would say the first two acts I quite enjoyed. Third act was a little bit weaker, in part because Xander Drax got demoted from being the main villain, yeah, or at
yeah,
least he got it. He came under the power of another villain.
yeah. Because they get the one of the skulls is at the museum in New York, and then they find the third skull on this island in basically like kind of like the Bermuda Triangle type
Uh,
place.
right, Bermuda Triangle, but in the South Pacific.
Yeah, and you rightfully pointed out that there was no way that little pontoon plane they were on had enough fuel to take them from New York to
Yeah, because here's the thing, like if so, the Phantom had to jump onto the airplane and was like he was holding onto the pontoon the whole flight. If he hadn't been there, I could have almost assumed that they had stopped to refuel at some point. But
yeah,
the fact that there's no way that he would cling to it for that long and then get off and then get back on again.
right, yeah,
There's just no way.
yeah,
Um, so like that was like a kind of a break in the reality of it. And then, but they come across this secret Sengal pirate or Senga pirate, whatever it
yeah,
is, uh, encampment run by the great Kabai Seng, played by Kari Hiroyuki Tagawa, who you may remember from Mortal Kombat as Shang Tsung.
yes, yes, yeah, and yeah, then he basically kind of takes over. Yeah, like you said, he kind of takes over as the villain.
For like half a scene,
Yeah,
and then Xander Drax gets the three skulls together, and it seems like everything is doomed until it turns out that the Phantom had the fourth skull that was needed to control it the whole time. It was his ring.
yes,
And they proceed to have a Dragon Ball Z style beam struggle
yeah,
to save the day,
yes, yeah,
which I only exaggerate slightly.
yeah,
uh, so that's the broad strokes of the movie. There are good phantom scenes. Actually, yeah, good phantom scenes which have action in them, which we glossed over. But
yeah,
uh, I would say that if this had just been you could have very easily rewritten this to lose the Phantom mythology and just have an interesting Indiana Jonesy style adventure.
hmm yeah,
Because I found that Zane was actually he looked cooler when he was just walking around in a uh, long coat and fedora in New York.
yeah.
That costume is kind of crap. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah, it does. It looks really cheesy. Yeah.
Right. And one thing I noticed, and you can kind of see that in the poster here, is that it had a texture to it.
Hmm.
Like there were it wasn't just a solid sheet of purple. It had a bunch of lined etchings in it, like with the image of a skull on the back of his shirt.
Yeah.
Which nice detail, but
Yeah. Yeah. Um, if I remember right, I believe it was Sci-Fi Channel tried to do a modern version of this. I want to say like 10, 15 years ago.
mhm.
Um, and they updated the suit to make it look a little more modern. You know, kind of give him like a helmet and armor and everything. Um, it was okay, not great.
That might be too far in the other direction. I would say like my biggest thing with this is it's a type of costume that was easy to draw,
Hmm.
but because daily comic strip, you kind of have to cut some corners somewhere.
Yeah, yeah,
But I don't know that the materials at the time would have necessarily let you make a workable costume like that that wouldn't just fall to pieces or give you heat stroke in the jungle.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Obviously they were trying to make it comic book accurate, which you know can work and sometimes it can't. Just look at Captain America's suit in the first Avengers movie.
Yeah. So I think I would overall say I enjoyed this more than I didn't,
Hmm.
just because it's a very different flavor than you often get from movies.
Yeah.
Like it's very much a 30s throwback.
Hmm.
So it's like watching an Indiana Jones movie that just happens to have a superhero in a bad costume.
Yeah.
Which, since Indiana Jones was inspired by, well, probably partially inspired by the Phantom,
Hmm.
if more of his stories were like this, then that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this movie, along with like other movies you mentioned, like The Shadow and Rocketeer and Dick Tracy, and also I would throw in like Batman the Animated Series.
Oh
Probably
yeah,
big, yeah, probably big reasons why I really like that time period. Um,
yeah. There was a lot of 30s media at the time when you think about it,
yeah.
because like Batman the Animated Series universe was strange in that
Hmm.
or in the early on before they did the new Batman Adventures where they updated it to match Superman the
Yeah.
animated series. Was like this weird alternate 30s,
Hmm.
like a world where like, okay, you know what? The rest of the world can have its fuel efficient cars. Gotham, local ordinances, we have to buy from Wayne Motors, and they have not updated their cars since the 30s.
Yeah. We got to fly around in blimps, and
Uh,
yeah.
we got Tommy guns.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I would say this is worth a watch. Like, don't go in expecting Godzilla -1, where it'll make pull at your heartstrings, or whatever. It's just a bunch of cool action scenes and a few nice scene chewing performances.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. My childhood memories were right with this one. Yeah.
Enjoyable but kind of silly.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we have exhausted all of our topics for tonight.
Indeed.